up here. That's great. Now I'm just waiting for the page to hit. Let's see. Actually, we're probably already going and it's buffered in. So this is going to be our first gaffe about the live stream, is that we were sitting here waiting for the live stream to start, but it's already been started and buffered up for a while. Yep, I see it out of the corner of my eye. They're going, hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
I'm Duncan. This is Simona. And we're excited to welcome you to the first of a series of 10 online interview conversations that we're doing. Last year we had an event series that we called Create. It was a world tour where we went all over the place, and we had both kind of a fireside chat and we had technical sessions. And the technical sessions were really good, but the fireside chat was the really interesting part. So as we were thinking about how do we get an online event to really thrive and do something interesting, we really thought, okay, can we actually grab onto this idea of doing fireside conversations with interesting people and do a series of those over the next 10 weeks? And both Simona and I fell in love with the idea. And so here we are. We're calling this Create Online. It's kind of a homage to the original Create tour that we had. And we're going to really be talking about resilience in the face of all of what's happening in the world right now. It's pretty crazy out there, and we are really trying to all get a handle on what's going on and what the future is going to be and how everything's going to go together. Our audience, audiences are broad, but we really, if you drew out kind of the bell curve of the audience that we want to go after, we really want to target CTOs and lead developers and technical decision makers kind of right in the middle of our audience. And Simona and I are going to choose the topics and choose the people that come on board and talk with us kind of based on the idea of, if we want to hear from them, then that's probably a good fit from that audience, right? It's a little bit of selection bias at work, but that's where we're going. And of course, the job for all these people really got hard. What's going on about it? Whoa! Oh no, we lost Simona audio. Technical problem number one. Oh boy. Well, I'll just fumble through here. The job of the CTOs and lead developers, of course, just got really interesting for the next 12 to 24 months as we try to figure out what we're doing. So our first guest that we wanted to bring on is, I cheated a little bit because, full disclosure, Simona and I really decided to do this Tuesday or Wednesday last week, and we'd been trying to figure out an event format for months, but when we hit this idea last week, we were like, we have to do this, and we have to do this now. And so I kind of cheated a little bit. I leaned on a local Berlin contact. I'm in Berlin, by the way. And so our first guest is going to be Travis Todd, and he's in charge of Silicon Allee, which is one of our local startup hubs here in Berlin. And
hello.
I will bring him in now.
Hello. Am I in?
You're in.
I'm in. All right. Cool. And my audio's working?
Your audio's working, and Simona, unfortunately, audio is not happy. So, hey, the perils of live streaming in progress.
I'll have to interpret her movements and hand language.
We'll do the best we can.
She's a living emoji.
So first up, how are you doing? I mean, this is the question that I find I start every conversation off with these days, but it's, the empathetic human, oh my God, need to figure out, how are other people doing?
Now
I lost your audio a little bit there, Travis.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, crap.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
Okay, I'm doing much better than my computer is, apparently. To answer that question. I'm freaking out a little bit less than it is. But it's good. I mean, I think having, we have a small team here. We have a full campus that we run here in Berlin Mitte, but the team is relatively small, and we all kind of have our own domains and what we work on, and we've adapted, I think, pretty well to remote life. It's taken a little bit of adjustment at home, but yeah, all considered, I think we're doing pretty well. Yeah, so.
Yeah. So what kind of companies do you have kind of in your purview at Silicon Allee?
Yes, I mean we have a lot of we're a community organization. It's like how I like to describe it. In our network are hundreds of thousands of founders and companies from Berlin and around the world that we kind of interface with at different levels, and more locally and more on a concern basis, we have our campus here in Berlin Mitte, which is the central district here in Berlin. We have 4 floors of office space and 2 floors of apartments here, and some event space. And we have small companies from a company called Big Chain DB and Ocean Protocol, which are blockchain companies, to Techstars is here in our building. So, the famous incubator they run, or sorry, accelerator, running, so they have a lot of earlier stage companies in here as well. Point 9 Venture Capital is our kind of resident VC. And then Klarna has another floor here in our building, and ResearchGate, another kind of local hero company here in Berlin, has 2 floors in our building. And so it's a mix of young early stage companies and bigger international startups, VCs, and kind of growth stage Berlin tech companies. And then we started actually doing pre-seed investment into companies earlier this year, and so we have six companies in our portfolio of really early pre-seed companies. Yeah.
Cool. And what's been the big impact for them so far? I mean, I guess let's start with the short term. What's the biggest short term impact that you're seeing on the companies that you have under your?
Well, this building is empty.
Oh,
I can see it. I'll wait. When I'm
almost.
Wait, am I back?
There you are. Yep.
All right, that's weird. It'll like flicker for a little bit. It'll freak out for a little while, and then it turns back on. I don't know what that is, but yeah, short-term impact is the building here is empty. I think that also people are really reconsidering office space in general and how much space they need to run a company, and then yeah, kind of how they can adapt, especially when they're in certain verticals to this new situation, right? So one of the first companies we invested in through our pre-seed Berlin Founders Fund is a company called Travel Spend, and they're obviously in the travel sector, and they're a budgeting app for people who are going on trips together. And like no one is doing that at the moment. So they had to make the decision, okay, do we stay in there? Do we pivot? What do we do? And so I think a lot of people are really making those kind of really short-term evaluations on if the market's going to change and how they adapt to on a real, I think, personal, human, and team level as well.
Yeah, no, that's. I'm hearing all sorts of things about startups from the ones that are like just digging in and trying to double down on what's going on versus, oh, let's just take a break and figure out, to the big ones about what the hell are we going to do about funding.
Yeah.
Funding is
and it completely depends on the situation, right? Like if you consider that if you've just raised a round or you've just raised some funding, then maybe you have the runway to kind of just say, let's go heads down and focus on product development at this point. Or if your market has been completely disrupted and you like lost the funding round, then yeah, you're going to have a bit more stress points.
So yeah, let's actually, somebody just popped in a question. Vergify asks, what's your opinion on the next startup financial background situation in the future? So obviously we have the financial situation crunching in right now, but then how does that go out to on and on and on into the future?
Cool. Yeah, I don't know if I'm qualified to give an opinion on that, but I can say that the thing I've seen, I think the thing that's really obvious right now is the support of governments funding companies and kind of keeping the economy afloat. And this is something that I think us in Europe are rather used to, and we got a lot of, let's say,
One moment. Yep. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
glitches.
Yeah, this one's great.
That's interesting. It's really interesting. I don't know. You'll have to come over here and debug this at some point, Duncan.
Maybe we need to test your laptop.
Yeah, it's an Apple, so maybe that's the problem. No, I just was saying, like, like you used to get a lot of flack in Europe for companies taking a lot of government funding, but now you look around the world and what an important role governments are playing in financing companies through this difficult situation. I think that people's views on government financing may change a little bit more.
Definitely, and it will be interesting to see how that moves long term. I mean, there's a short term kind of government interventions and the long term government interventions. Here in Germany, as you know, but for everybody who's listening in, we had an interesting plan that came in 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, where for small business owners, they were actively saying, okay, apply for a grant to help you cover your losses through this time. And there's rules and stipulations, and of course, that'll all be dealt with or analyzed by the tax process at the end of the year. But my wife is self-employed, and she was able to apply and in 24 hours get a grant of like 5,000 euro to help with things. And that's such a market change from what I'm hearing from my friends in other countries.
Well, yeah, and even as two Americans, American-born, sitting here in Germany, we can point the finger back at our home country a little bit and look at the flaws. But there are still issues in Germany. Like everyone is not being helped, and I think the government is kind of scrambling to try and help people out. There's a little bit of a problem with companies over 10 employees that are kind of like these really mid-sized startups that aren't getting the kind of support that they need or they're asking for from the German government, and I've heard a lot of kind of rumblings about that, and the government's going to have to step in, and they're trying to figure out how they can support those companies. But in general, I think the response here has been pretty quick and clear and substantial. Who knows if they can maintain that going forward, though?
No, it's definitely a good question to see.
I'll make a plug that we have an article coming out on Silicon Allee in the next week on the government bailout programs happening in Germany as well.
Excellent. So for everybody here in Germany, check it out.
Yeah.
So another question from the audience. Gabrielle Benefield asks, how are startups faring that are like in the middle of trying to raise money right now? What are about the ones that are midway, and what do they do? Have you seen anything in that of this nature?
Can you repeat the question?
Connectivity.
Yeah, sorry.
So, do you have any startups that are like midway through through a funding process, or actively trying to think about how to pitch? And if so, what effects do you see right now?
I mean, most of the companies that we've funded are pretty early stage, and we've just made the initial investment into them. So none of them are really, I'd say, at the stage where they're actively out there raising a funding round. But from our network, I have heard stories of companies that were right before this pandemic about to close something and did have their funding pulled. Did have investors back out. And I think that's a really, it's really telling. I think you're going to really see, and there's been a lot of talk about this, on social media and stuff about which investors are actually like investing during this period and stuff. I think it'll be really telling, the ones that do kind of stick by their word that they're open for business instead of just kind of using that as marketing, but really just, hunkering down and waiting and helping their existing portfolio companies. And I think, again, it depends on the industry, because, anybody in gastronomy or food delivery or mobility to a sense, to travel, like that's going to be a much more difficult industry for investors to be investing in at the moment. And so I think you're seeing a lot of those companies trying to pivot and find a way to create at least products for this other market, which is the great thing about startups, right? Like startups are resilient and entrepreneurs are creative, and some of the most amazing things we've seen are some of the new products being put out like in no time by startups in Berlin and around the world.
Yeah, that gets into something my colleague Ian McDonald was wondering is kind of, do you see any general, well, I should rewind this. Do you see any general differences between like the B2C companies versus the B2B companies? You were talking a little bit about distinctions, but if you can generalize a little bit, is there something in that?
That's a good question. I'd say the because the life cycle of B2B, it's a little bit more stable, right? And you are seeing those.
Oh.
One sec.
Oh boy! For all of you following along at home, thank you for bearing with us on this one.
When my audio is cutting out, I'm just going to pretend I'm deep in thought. All
There
right?
you go.
No, I'm saying like the more lifestyle-y businesses are obviously taking a hit, right? So we've seen Urban Sports Club, which is a great startup here in Germany that's loved by anyone with any fitness person in Berlin. Loves this company. They can go to any. It's like one of these like class pass where you can have one membership for multiple gyms, and they've taken a huge hit because every single gym is closed. Whereas if you are delivering B2B software or something like that, it's much more resilient, and especially if you're in industries where it makes that are taking that need a lot more input at the moment. So, for example, we just published an article today about telemedicine, a few telemedicine startups and health tech startups who are just dealing with unprecedented growth at this time, right? And so I think those kind of B2B businesses are really finding new opportunities in this as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, if you were to take I don't know, if you were to try to take like a jump right now, if you're just about to get started, if you're about to like really dig into an idea and start assembling the teams, to say you've got that idea, you're right at the point where you need to build the IP out, because if you don't build out the IP, you're not going to move, but you need to build out the IP in order to get funding and all that. What general directions seem really interesting right now?
Do you mean like technology wise, like
Sure.
vertical wise?
Like vertical wise or wherever that the thought takes you.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this like forced digitization of industries and businesses is really interesting, right? There was this really funny like joke going around on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, like who led the digital revolution in your company? Was it the CEO, the CTO, or the COVID? And so, and you're seeing industries who've always talked about doing digitization, like education and medicine, who've always seen it as the future, but not actually had the resources or time or commitment to actually digitize and do things like telemedicine or online education. Now they're being forced to. So it's actually a really exciting time to be in those fields because, there's a demand.
We're back to the pose. Well, let me see if I can mirror you. Are you there? There we go.
It's a really strange feature. I don't know why it's doing that. Yeah, and so I think that those fields are super interesting at the moment. And then obviously pharma and medicine, like.
Yeah. So all of those areas should be somehow easier to raise funds in. Jonas just wrote in a question saying, would that mean that perhaps now it's somehow easier to raise funds for startups that focus on specific areas, or are they going to see the same amount of headway that they would normally see?
I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing is like you mentioned that, and I think a lot of people are kind of scared to do anything at the moment, or maybe scared to like start a new business, but the rest of the world's kind of on pause, right? So if you can jump in and start creating action and creating something, there's a lot of opportunity in that. And I have no idea if companies that in those verticals will have a better chance of being funded or not. I mean, it makes sense that they would. Yeah, and if they can generate traction, it's kind of like any startup, right? If you can prove product market fit, then yeah, you'll get funding. And I'd say, but those, yeah, I mean, I guess long answers, yeah. Or short answers, yeah. Those would be the industries that I imagine would get more funding in the near term, and it's all about this like kind of recession-proof businesses, right? Things that are not luxury items. So maybe don't start your like, next shoe company. Instead, start a telemedicine business or something like that. Yeah.
So maybe startups that are an Uber for X or an Airbnb for X, maybe that's if those are your primary descriptors, back off a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, what's your opinion?
Fair enough. I mean, I agree. I think it's going to be fascinating to see where this all goes and where it takes us. But definitely, in the conversations I've had with people around, there are basically, I would say, three buckets. There are the companies that their entire business model just got hammered. They're not going to get funding. They're figuring out what to do with everybody, how to have the sanest possible off-ramp for folks and try to wrap things up, because as far as they can see, it's not going to happen, and they don't see the funding coming quickly. So that's like the oh crap bucket. Then on the far side of that are the startups that have figured out how to either they're dead center in what's going on and what helps, like they're in health tech or they're building tests or they're doing something like that, or they figured out a way to quickly pivot into this. One of the future speakers that I'm talking to get on the show in a couple of weeks is he runs a company in Chicago that has been teaming up with high-end restaurants, and they've been doing reservations for high-end restaurants. It's not quite open table because what they're doing is actively like a full seating of a restaurant gets booked through them and with a fixed menu and everything, and it's really a cool idea that really fancy restaurants have been using. But of course, their entire business just stopped, right? And so they were able to really just dive in and pivot to enabling takeout and delivery for really good food. So instead of just being able to get delivery from the normal restaurants you get, like, the burger places or the pizza joints or even the Chili's if you happen to be in the States, if you have a good dinner, you want to have a nice dinner, like where you'd actually spend some money on it, they're enabling that, and apparently that's going really well. So that's one bucket there. And then in the middle is the big bucket of, oh my God, what do? We don't even know. We're just trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a good point. Like I'm seeing a couple variations of that as well. Like companies that are seeing the opportunity and pivoting a bit. We had a company in our portfolio as well named called Athletes, and they were. Their initial product was to try and democratize sports scouting, especially for lower leagues. So they wanted to build like a crowdsourced kind of way for audience members who are watching a sporting event to like scout players. But then like all sports stopped. So they were like, what do we do? But they had these great relationships with these football clubs and stuff. And so they said, well, let's actually pivot to kind of doing more B2B scouting analytics software, and so I think you're seeing those companies that are taking the opportunity to pivot, to create new products. All the distilleries are now creating hand sanitizer. So I think there's a lot of that, and those I think are the companies that will weather the storm. But that middle bucket. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this kind of sorts out a little bit the wheat from the chaff a little bit, the entrepreneurs from the real entrepreneurs in a sense, and you got to remember that some of the best, biggest companies in the world.
Whoops, we just lost you again. But I know where you're going. Yeah, the biggest and best companies in the world, a lot of them started in one of the downturns that we had before. I mean, Google showed up in the middle of a downturn, and others did too. It's really fascinating to see what can happen when some of those pressures come in. Okay, I think we've got audio again.
I'm back.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're back. So so let's take it to the tech people a little bit. A question came in: what do you think about the tech employment hiring rate for the next year or two? And I guess part of this is if you're a tech person in startup land, how do you figure out or how do you react? So not necessarily from the company perspective, but from the personal perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to learn how to work remotely, right? That's the big one. So pitch yourself as able to work remotely. I think the crazy thing now is that, there are going to be a lot of great talents on the market. And I think the market as well now has also gone kind of worldwide, right? As companies are being forced to be more remote, many more of them are seeing that this is actually possible. I've heard that refrain like a few times already. Like we didn't have that many remote employees, but now we realize this is working, so we're actually going to consider remote employees now, which I think will provide a lot of opportunities for a lot of people who maybe if they weren't based in Berlin or they weren't based in San Francisco, may be able to kind of get a better job as well. But it will get more competitive in that sense, and so I think that's also going to be super interesting. And as more companies fail, there'll be more people on the market, but also maybe less jobs.
Right. No, I hate to use terms like Darwinism, but this is kind of the place where we get to see some of that that digital Darwinism in action.
Well, and in Berlin, kind of we get, there's been criticisms that a lot of the kind of founders have been kind of creating more just your next e-commerce site, and they're kind of old ex-McKinsey consultants who are not really kind of in it for the lifestyle. And now I think maybe this is a reset to kind of flush them out of the system and get back to the people who really want to change the world and create great businesses and are in it for the right reasons.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said earlier about, everybody has to now work from home. And there's two things I'm really curious to see is one, how much does it stick after everybody can go back? But I kind of have a feeling it's going to stick a lot more than people anticipate because, working from home is not the same thing as working from home during pandemic. But it has given a lot of people the ideas that maybe we can do a lot of our work from wherever we happen to be, and we're learning new ways of working.
People are being forced to put those tools into place. They're putting the policies in.
Oh, we just lost you again. Dang. Yeah, they've been forced to put the tools and policies into place, and they're ramping up on the Teams or whatever other collaboration product they're using. And I mean, from my company's perspective, Microsoft, the whole Teams thing has been absolutely eye-opening. It's amazing to watch how many people are now using that full-time and how that's already changing the way people are thinking. And I'm so fascinated to see what's going to stick out of that. But I also then think a lot about like what David Heinemeier Hansson from 37 Signals has been going on about, because he's famously against the whole Teams or Slack or who, sitting around in group chat and getting your work done. He's like, let's just focus, have email, and really just move more slowly and more deliberately rather than being fractured in our attention.
That's, I think, the next. Like putting the tools in place for the communication and then using them the right way is going to be the hardest step. But I think you're right about this is going to stick around. I mean, the flip side of this is when these kind of big world-changing events happen, from a political or like cybersecurity standpoint, right? There's all these concerns about they're going to we start sharing our data about tracking about coronavirus and tracking each other, and now those are the kinds of things that kind of tend to stick around from a policy and government perspective. But I think you could make the same analogy in business, right? When we're forced to innovate, those things are going to stay around. And I think there's been a lot of great articles written about, especially in the U.S., that workers' benefits are increasing because people are realizing, gee, we need to actually provide these sorts of benefits for our employees to make sure they can have a good work-life balance and stuff. So I think that culture will definitely stick around.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how this kind of affects or steps into other countries. So, like in Europe, of course, there's a lot more. I hesitate to use the word because in the other countries it's very politically loaded, but a little bit more socialism and helping people out. And in the States, it's interesting to see how many of the big tech companies are actually stepping in and doing things that would be vaguely considered along those lines. Having their cafeteria workers, instead of sending them home, they're actually making food for the school kids and doing whatever it takes because they want to retain that their employees and what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the silver lining in all this, I guess, as well.
Yeah. So let's go longer term. So we've talked about the short term, the longer term. What do you think this means for the distribution of technology startups around the world? So, obviously you and I are here in the outpost of Berlin. At least it's an outpost compared to Silicon Valley or New York. But and we've long thought about how this should work out globally, or how we'd like to see this change globally. But how do you see this particular COVID effect happening and changing that equation?
I was doing my thinking face a little bit when you were asking that question because I did lose audio again. But you were asking about the distribution around the world?
Yeah. Like how is this long term going to affect where startups happen and how we congregate and how we get together and gather?
Yeah, I mean, I think before this we were also seeing the slowly seeing that this kind of there was always this phrase like great startups can come from anywhere. I don't remember who was originally quoted with it, but it's this mantra among VCs and accelerators or whatever, great startups can come from anywhere. But in the reality, you kind of had to be in big cities to get the right amount of funding and all this sort of stuff. And I think and I was starting to get the feeling that reality was actually happening before this pandemic, that smaller startups coming out of university cities around the world or second tier cities, on the rise in Europe, especially in the US. And I think this will only accelerate that. I think that you're gonna see, I think, a real flattening of those ecosystems and once we kind of have this new world order where everything is much more possible remotely and digitally, I think you'll see just as many companies in Chattanooga, Tennessee, as in Boston. I think that you'll have just as many opportunities. There still needs to be these kind of connected through lines to the financial capitals where these things have been ingrained for so long. But I'm hoping that it expedites that kind of spreading of that possibility.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. Although what you bring up about the ties to financial lines is also interesting because, sitting here, we've had the whole Brexit thing happening for years now, and I so thought that was going to actually hammer the startups in London, and yet the London startup scene seems to be still trucking along, or at least it has been till now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still too early to tell on that, and it's way too early to tell on the pandemic stuff. I was just having a conversation with our partners in London this morning as well, and I really see this COVID. I see a lot of parallels between Brexit and COVID because it's going to become. I feel like now people are kind of getting to the point where they're kind of done getting information about the virus. Like they understand it, they understand the implications. They're accept.
Oh, we just lost your sound again. It's coming. It's coming. Don't worry, we'll edit these bits out.
It was a great pause because it was like the perfect pause.
I know, but you're right on something there.
Yeah, but I think that it's going to become part of the conversation, right? So the same way that people just stop talking about Brexit, it becomes part of the larger conversation. So we're like, let's have a discussion about fintech, about a global fintech like event, and talk about fintech. And then you can say, well, okay, now one of the topics we will add in is what's the effect of the coronavirus and the pandemic. But it's not going to be so like singularly focused on this pandemic, I hope. And I think like the public is ready for these kind of discussions again. So I can throw that at you as well in these series going forward.
So yeah, no. So I'm going to actually do something that you weren't expecting here. But in thinking about this first episode and this first session and trying to figure out, obviously we're both in Berlin. We have a Berlin bias viewpoint. And I was thinking about who else can we get to kind of triangulate in on what we're talking about and what we're saying and what we're thinking. And there's somebody that we know in common, actually, that came to mind. And so I'm going to bring in David Troy.
Special guest.
Special guest. As soon as he can jump into the chat here, as fast as Skype does its Skypey thing.
Oh man, I David Troy, he gave my family our first internet connection. That's how I know him.
And of course, I try to set this up, and I'm not seeing Dave pop up here. Damn it. Fail fast.
Well, we can talk about all the amazing things Dave is doing.
Yeah. So let's introduce Dave until that pops in. Dave Troy is an entrepreneur. I keep trying to say he's from the DC area, but that's not exactly true. He's from Baltimore.
He's from Maryland.
Yeah, which is if for the people over in that part of the world, that's actually a really big deal. That's a very big distinction.
Yeah.
And he's been doing a lot of work over the years, also kind of in the intersection of a lot of spaces. He's been interested in big data. He's done a lot of stuff with statistics and analysis. He's also really interested in disinformation. And it's been amazing to see the kind of work that he's done over there.
Yeah, a lot of AI and misinformation stuff. I mean, and I think that's also a super interesting topic at the moment because it's an industry that we maybe didn't touch on before. But now my audio problems.
Oh, that's so great. We got audio problems. We got Dave. Yep, he's there. Let's see. Woo, I just lost everybody. This is awesome. This is amazing.
Hey there.
Hey, we were just talking about you. Hopefully we can get Travis back in here as well. And anyway, I was just introducing you as...
There's Travis.
There's Travis. Here we go.
I had to whatever. I'm here.
The amazing thing about all this experience is that even though there's all sorts of things that are busting here and there, we've actually had pretty good robustness in reestablishing the communication paths. And if somebody was like trying to do a study case or a case study on TCP/IP, this might be a decent one.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's actually been interesting. I feel like I've been so connected to people. Like we've all been making up for the lack of physical connection with like online, and I'm busier than ever with all this. So it's been interesting, and good to see you, Travis.
Yeah, good to see you too, Dave. I think the last we saw each other was at a lunch here in Berlin, quickly before this whole thing.
This was
collapsed.
the last thing that we got to do before the world ended. Yeah, it was interesting. It's a good way to spend the final weekend.
Yeah, no kidding. My wife and I took a trip to Paris about the same time, and we're so thankful we did because it's like that one last trip before all this really cranked in on us.
Yeah, exactly.
So, David, have you had a chance to listen to the stream so far and kind of get a sense of where we've been?
I haven't actually. My daughter is trying to learn SketchUp, and she is, of course, home from university like most students. So I've been trying to learn SketchUp so I can help her learn SketchUp, which has been interesting. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to tune in for the last few minutes, but yeah, I'm sure you've been covering startup business and that kind of thing.
Yeah. We talked about kind of what we've been seeing here in Berlin, but kind of curious in getting a triangulation on what you've seen from the Baltimore / Greater DC / East Coast perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's, obviously a lot of IT startups are able to, have people working from home. We have a distributed team of people based here in Maryland, as well as some people in Warsaw. not too far from you. So we just did a sort of a weekly stand up with the entire team this morning, looking at stuff that's in the pipeline and trends in business right now. So we make email tools. We have a product called Maelstrom and another one called Chuck, both of which are focused on kind of email management. And those tools have actually been doing great during all this. So we're seeing kind of an uptick in business. But at the same time, it's a little bit more difficult to get stuff done because people are working from home and there's kids and, there's just a lot more sort of distractions and interference than what we normally have. But, we're still able to get stuff done and still moving forward. And here in the, Baltimore metro area, I think a lot of startups are in the same boat, where they're trying to adapt to working from home. It's not always ideal. Some people's businesses, I'm familiar with a couple of startups locally that are very tied into the events business, and they're just flattened. Like they were trying to do there's one company I know that was doing photo booths for weddings and, trade shows and stuff like that. And that's just not happening. So they're trying to figure out how to kind of reinvent their business. And, I think that's difficult. Things that are reliant on events and whatnot are having a really hard time. But, some other things are thriving. And, we're also starting to see a lot of chatter here about starting to loosen restrictions. I know in Berlin, I guess last week, they just eased some restrictions somewhat.
Yeah, they did some.
The kids are back to school this week, right? Some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah.
My kid won't be going back to school until like fall, I don't think. But I
Yeah,
think like secondary, they've done that. But the events thing you were just saying, really that hits home for a lot of us who are in tech land because O'Reilly actually has just done a pretty big thing when it comes to their events.
I saw.
Yeah, so if you don't know, everybody that's in the tech space knows about O'Reilly books, and then they also have the conferences that they've done for 3 decades or something, and they've now shut down their conference division.
Wow.
Pretty much entirely.
Yeah. It's not a temporary thing. It's like just not coming back, right?
Right. And so it's not necessarily that they didn't already have thoughts in this direction, because they obviously did, or else they wouldn't have quite moved so fast on this. But it's amazing to see that COVID has been an accelerator for changes coming and where they're hitting.
Yeah, if I want to add a flip side to that, the interesting thing about our events that we found is, since we have been doing a lot of really hyper local events, we have this monthly meetup, which takes place physical location here, and we've now moved that online, which has actually been really interesting for us, because now something we kind of didn't expect, but now we actually have a worldwide attendee list. So there are some, there is some kind of silver lining there as well, where we're now actually able to attract many more people to our events than we typically would have, that we're actually pretty excited about as well. So
yeah, I've been, as I run TEDx Mid-Atlantic in the DC area, and we've been doing some online virtual events, and those have been widely attended by people from all outside our area, and been streamed all over the place. So that's another way to kind of reach more people than you otherwise would have. And it's been interesting. It's given us an opportunity to kind of reinvent. What does it mean to develop this kind of community? What are these events for? What's possible? And so it's been, I think, an interesting period of experimentation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really see the same dynamics that we've seen several times happening in the event space, and how companies reach out to people and how communities join together. And yeah, hit by COVID is going to be an interesting thing.
Yeah, for sure.
We're about to publish last on the events note, we're about to publish another article here soon about kind of Corona pivots. And we had one event company here in Berlin that did ticketing software. And they've actually built instead a traffic light for grocery stores to count the number of people, and then allow the grocery store to let people in when there's vacancy in the store. So also I think interesting pivot by a events company.
For sure.
So Dave, we talked a little bit about how the impact to startups and startups who are kind of in the middle of their funding cycles and how they're having to react to the situation. What have you been seeing from the Mid-Atlantic?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that there's a variety of things that are just sort of proceeding because they're either like in a field that isn't affected, or there's stuff that's like in the biospace. I'm a Johns Hopkins University alumni. They've got a lot of stuff happening in the biospace, sort of coming out of Johns Hopkins these days. That kind of stuff seems to be more or less uninterrupted by this. But, as I say, companies that are like doing anything related to events or, other stuff that's taken a hit, retail, a lot of retail, I think, is going to be suffering. Certainly physical retail, e-commerce seems like is in an interesting space, in that I think certain types of stuff probably, like clothing and, things like that probably are not doing that great, because if you think about it, a lot of people buy clothing to go out and see and be seen and that kind of thing, and that's not really happening right now. But in terms of like other kinds of e-commerce, like grocery deliveries or other types of specialty foods, I'm familiar with a startup called Whitebox, which is actually a company that my son is going to be starting at on June 1st, and that's based here in Baltimore, and they are growing just exponentially. They are about to take over a warehouse that previously was used by Under Armour for a lot of its fulfillment stuff, and I think it's like something like 200,000 square feet. So I don't know what that is in square meters for the European audience, but it's large, and they're coming from like a 40,000 square foot warehouse. So their business has amplified by some factor of like 20 times or something like that as a result of this. So it's interesting. I think that we're going to see some real shifts in the economy, and a lot of department stores and things are going to, I think, go away here in the States. I don't know how it's going to affect Europe and if it'll be the similar situation, but I think that we're going to see a lot more online e-commerce coming out of the other side of this.
Yeah, we've had an interesting thing here in Berlin where apparently they can open up to a certain size store, but anything bigger can't open up. So like the big box retailers, we don't really have big box retailers like the States do, but that kind of a store is really, they're feeling almost discriminated against right now.
Yeah. Smaller businesses are able to be open here. Certainly, anything that sells like food, coffee, beer, wine is able to be open, but pretty much any other business right now isn't. So.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, no, I was making the comment before, and I know this is an area. I don't know if this is apropos to our discussion, but I'm really curious to hear Dave's talk on it. But about media and media consumption, like I was trying to make the point earlier before my audio cut out, that the really interesting industry now that has been suffering is media. Media consumption has skyrocketed, but with that is also a lot of like misinformation and things like that. And we're looking at investing in a company that's doing kind of AI for misinformation and fake news and stuff like that. And I know, Dave, you do a lot of work in that, and I was curious if you had any thoughts or opinions about that in today's environment.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion of the term infodemic to describe what's happening with this, and the idea is
I've heard that.
like, pretty much. Yeah, no, I'm not convinced that it's that great of a term, but it kind of is catchy because what we really are talking about is disinfodemic and misinfodemic, and the difference between disinformation and misinformation being misinformation that is just wrong and harmful, but maybe not intended to be harmful. Disinformation is information that's created with the intent to harm. And so we're seeing both of those things come out in droves, and, from China and Russia are both putting out things that could be considered disinformation, talking about, the origins of the virus, the potential for it to be related to 5G, which of course is just crazy nonsense. And other kinds of fake cures and other bad information about the virus have been floating around quite a bit. So, it's a real problem, and there are various people trying to address this with various kinds of AI tools, and that can definitely help. But One of the other things that we're seeing in terms of AI with respect to this kind of information is it can actually be used to generate misinformation. So you can have generative, we've heard about generative networks to produce things like deepfake videos and deepfake audio, and that's definitely a problem. But you can also do things like generate deepfake text, and that kind of text, which doesn't even have to be that complicated, is very difficult to detect and to disarm. So imagine if you created a flood of websites and seeded them with a flood of nonsense news articles that make crazy claims because they're generated by AI, but they're sort of indistinguishable from real news articles, and then you get enough people to sort of share them and push them around, you just sort of end up with this pink slime that sort of covers the earth with garbage info, and it makes it very difficult to pull out the stuff that's actually any good. So that's kind of what we're concerned about. And the other thing that's being seen in the disinformation space is that a lot of it is now starting to spread through networks that we can't monitor. So that would include things like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, iMessage, various kinds of private, secure encrypted platforms that you just can't monitor. And so that's becoming kind of the go-to mechanism of choice, and we're seeing radicalization occur in places like Brazil and other countries through those kinds of mechanisms. So I don't know, specifically what the company that you're talking about is aiming to address, but certainly we need as many sharp minds on this as we can get, and it's a very difficult developing problem.
Yeah, where's the what do you think that looks like going forward? Like, who's funding that? Who's supporting it? Is it going to be mostly government supported, or is there like a carve out where there's like a private industry around fighting disinformation? So
there's several different sort of entities that are getting deeply involved in this. The two that off the top of my head I can think of are the Atlantic Council has a group called Digital Forensics Lab, which is funding a lot of stuff in this space. There's the EU has a unit called Stratcom East, which is based in Brussels, that has been tasked specifically with sort of like fighting Russian origin disinformation. But there's a variety of other sort of government, quasi-government things. Facebook is actually allocating some funds to try to address this. I don't know if other tech companies are starting to do so more seriously, but I suspect many are. But again, it's difficult to make money doing this. This is not a thing where there's a ton of ROI other than not destroying our democracies. Like, if that's the only ROI, companies aren't that interested. So we've got to improve that, I think, to some extent.
Man, that's a bad place to be in an ROA situation. Democracy is definitely shouldn't be for sale, but we can go all sorts of political on this and end up way in the weeds. But let me actually roll it back a little bit. So, Dave, you're now CTO of 410 Labs. Go ahead. CEO, yeah. What's the most challenging technical decision or set of decisions that you've had to make just in the last, say, 3 or 4 weeks?
Oh, interesting question. I think for us right now, trying to figure out sort of like what we can do in our kind of halfway state right now is the biggest challenge. There's certain projects that we had slated for this year that we may just have to slow down on a little bit or decide not to do or reprioritize. For us right now, I think the biggest thing is just making sure that everything is holding up under the load that we're getting. So we have a lot of different servers and stuff that are real time reacting to stuff happening in the world, dealing with people's email and stuff. And so that needs to be robust, secure, highly available, all of that. So it's just that kind of stuff right now. We're moving some stuff over from one technology stack to another. And so, dealing with some of that. But that's kind of most of it right now. And then I think, later this year, if things continue to kind of grow the way they are, we're probably going to be looking to hire, which is going to mean we're going to need to probably onboard some people remotely without meeting them, which will be interesting. So
how do you expect that you're going to be able to do that? I mean, we've seen some of that already happening, obviously, in some companies. But from your perspective, what does it mean to onboard somebody remotely? or even interview somebody remotely.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just going to kind of extend what we've been doing, using Zoom and other tools, Skype and whatnot to connect with folks and, try to get as good a sense as we can, via remote tools. But I think in general, one thing that I can see is that we're probably moving towards more of being a distributed company. And on the one hand, we have been for some time, but I feel like that this is pushing us more in that direction. For one thing, we developed more competency around it. For another, it may just be a reality of like trying to find the people that we want is probably easier, if we can look around the entire planet than if we just restrict ourselves to, a couple of local areas. So that's probably the direction that we're going to be moving. And even as a very small company, I think a lot of business owners are going to be facing that decision of like, how do they move forward? How do they grow? And I think distributed is going to start to look a lot more attractive to a lot of people.
I think the biggest challenge there too, and the one we're seeing within our team as well is like the communication aspect, right? Like how do you communicate effectively distributed? And that's, I think, like the biggest hurdle we've had. Do you have any like tips for that as somebody who focuses on communications?
What we've been doing is basically morning, stand-ups via Google Meet, and that turns out to be pretty effective in terms of just getting everybody on the same page. And then we do also a 3:00 one for a smaller section of the team. And, for right now, that's enough to at least keep us on track. I think maybe we could do more than that. But I also, from my perspective as just like a manager and as a human, I think it's very important to kind of respect the fact that people have, a difficult situation to manage here, that they have real human lives that they've got to manage, and, work is important, but it doesn't necessarily have to come in front of other concerns that people have as humans. So, we're trying to balance that in a way that I think is, decent. And I think that that's going to, perhaps be an area of challenge going forward. Because, the bottom line is I don't think people can be necessarily quite as productive in this mode, especially as they're getting used to it. But over time, our thought is that we ought to be able to get us about back to where we were before. But that's going to take a little bit of time and practice, maybe.
No, definitely, it's going to take a lot of practice to get into the current mode. I mean, I've got days where I feel like I get maybe 2 hours worth of work done, and that's it. And
right.
At first I was, thinking, okay, it's because my wife and we have a almost 4-year-old kid, and so we're splitting childcare and we're doing all that. But then I've talked with people who don't have kids, and they've been really having a hard time too.
I find it comes in kind of fits and starts. Like some days I can be really productive, other days less so, and some days I think it's not unreasonable to feel, kind of depressed about some of this, like this is an incredibly wrenching change for all of us. And, there's a lot of people dying and a lot of people affected by it. And it's not unreasonable to just feel some days like it's too much. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's we're at the end of an hour. An hour has gone by with technical difficulties and all sorts of fun along the way. But let's wrap up with one last question, which is, what is the personal thing that you are going to try to do over the next couple of weeks to help keep yourself sane and really try to turn the corner from just reacting to acting?
So
Travis, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, you want some extra time to think, don't you? Well, I'm making the unenviable decision of I'm actually moving apartments this weekend in the middle of a pandemic, which is going to make me go completely insane. So I'm going to try and stay sane after that. But I think for me, really, what I've learned, and going back to this topic about communication as well, is really trying to set a better routine for myself, so that it feels a bit more like a normal day each day. And that's, I think, going to help a lot with my sanity. But luckily, I think here in Berlin, as we mentioned, things are opening up a little bit more. Hopefully, I have a little bit more interaction, ability to go outside. And I've found that exercise and having this routine has been super helpful over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, agreed. I've been trying to get some exercise too, and it's been a little bit cold and rainy here the last week or so. But going on some long bike rides and just trying to stay centered. And also, I think, respecting the fact that the situation continues to evolve, and that what made sense like 3 weeks ago maybe doesn't make sense now, and to just constantly reevaluate to try to figure out, okay, what's the best way through this, recognizing that it's going to continue to evolve, and that, each day you got to kind of reassess where things are and do what makes sense for you. So, yeah, one day at a time. I think the same way people handle, crises since forever, just get through it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. It's time for the Stoicism to kick in a bit. You were about to say something, Travis?
I wanted to know what you were going to do, Duncan.
For me, it really comes to just trying to make sure to do two things. One is schedule out my day. Actually, three things. Schedule out my days even more. My wife and I have started talking every morning about how we want to schedule our days together, and just getting better at that is really essential. And the second is exercise. I found it incredibly hard to really get onto a good exercise kick while being in lockdown. But the last week or so, I've been able to hit the water rower like every day or almost every day. I didn't do it yesterday, be honest. But that's really been helpful. And then the third is just really work on that whole accepting what's going on out there, and then focusing on what I can control, being, my reactions and what I do next. And those three things I'm really just wanting to continue to work on as much as I can.
Makes sense.
So thank you all for joining me on this initial journey into our streaming world. We've had a couple of questions come up about our choices here. At least one question asking, why are we streaming on YouTube and not on Teams? And the answer to that is moving fast. Like I said at the beginning of this, Simone and I decided to do this last week, and we're starting out now, and we're jumping in fast. Part of it is also trying to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible and widening the audience. Now, we're talking about how to add teams back in. Maybe we do some sort of restream thing, or we do a multi-stream thing. LinkedIn is pretty interesting to me as well. But yeah, we thanks for the feedback, and we hear you. And finally, if you have any feedback on what you've seen, other than, yes, we had technical glitches, please forgive. I'd love to hear from them. You can email me, duncand@microsoft.com, or if you have anything you want to relay to these two awesome gentlemen, I can do that too. You can email me, and we can do that. And so thank you again, Dave, for doing this last minute hop in. And
it's great. Good to see you both.
Thank you. Great to see you as well.
And for me, this has been kind of an exercise as we get started with this, in like really leveraging like who are your friends, and who can you rope in to try and experiment with you. And that's kind of, we do that a lot in startup land, and that feels like a good way to approach it. So again, thank you very much. And for everybody else, we will be back next week. We'll put out some announcements when we have our schedule slated, and we hope to see you then. So cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thanks a lot, Duncan.
Stay safe.
See you guys next time.
All right. I just finished out, and that leaves us here. So yes, again, Dave popped out. So again, thank you very much. Yeah. How'd that feel?
Except for the stupid technical difficulties. I don't know what it's weird. Like this little I get this it's trying to figure out the microphone, and it's doing this can't find the microphone, blah blah blah, and then it did the same pattern each time. Like I'm looking at it like a software engineer going, what is this bug? What is this if else loop that it's in?
Right.
I have no idea what's happening there. It was good. I think it was some tough questions. I wasn't really prepared for some of those big answers, but
oops, I lost your sound again. Damn it.
I should send you a video.
I'll just unplug the headphones. Go. Yeah.
Okay, now it's back. Right?
Yep, it's back.
Yeah, I'm sending you a video. to the Skype team. Yeah, and I think, I mean, sometimes it's like some of these questions, I don't know if it's new information for people, but for me, it's like I've had so many of these talks with people that I'm kind of like, I don't know if it's useful anymore to like talk about, I don't know, what startups are doing and how they're pivoting and stuff. But I guess there's still a lot of people out there that's still super interesting new information, right?
Right. And, it gives a framework for the discussion. I think from my standpoint, I really want to go into my next conversations a little bit more focused with a set of questions, maybe. And then another thing I was noticing was how challenging it is to juggle live streaming and holding a conversation with you all. Like I'm sitting here doing this video switching and talking to you all, and
oh yeah.
So
well, what I've seen other people do is like honestly when they have to do like the hosting, they have like an assistant. Like doing the actual like switching and reading the chat and going, okay, here's a question from the chat, like they kind of have another person in there just doing that role, which is interesting.
So apparently I did not actually cut the stream out well enough. So we've been doing our postmortem live. This is awesome.
Real-time feedback.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to pop you back on screen, and why not? I mean,
my audio will probably cut out immediately.
Hopefully, I didn't say anything too obscene there.
No, and I think it actually works well when you have another guest too, because then when my audio kept cutting out, like at least someone else was talking.
Exactly.
And luckily, it kind of kept cutting out right when Dave was talking, so I was like, okay, well, I'll just wait till it's back. Yeah.
Swap it.
Yeah. I hope I didn't like derail the conversation on the misinformation stuff. I've just been seeing Dave post all that stuff, and I was really curious like where his head was at with it.
Yeah, no, he's doing amazing work there, and I want to figure out how to have more conversations with him about it, because it's really important work right now.
Yeah, and it's deeply technical too, right? From an AI and machine learning kind of perspective, and it's a huge challenge, as he mentioned. Like, this is so important, but who actually like pays for this? Do government?
And the audio cuts out again. Awesome. Let's see if it comes back.
Yeah, okay, I'm back.
There we go.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, do governments mandate that like companies need to like have this sort of software or something? Who knows?
Mm-hmm. No, there's huge questions, and I'm certainly interested in it.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Totally, man. And thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah, and we'll talk more as it goes on. Stay sane.
Cool.
All right.
Hey, buddy.
Ciao, and
bye.
Ciao to the 26 people who are still watching the debrief. Thank you for joining us again. I appreciate
you. You don't have anything better to do.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, bye.